"I didn't send for a woman," he said. "Not as greeting, not as insult, just as fact, the way a man states the weather or the price of grain. I sent for help." Selah Briard had been standing in the Wyoming wind for less than a minute, her traveling bag at her feet and dust from the road still settling on her shoulders, and she had already decided two things about Cormac Lund. He was telling the truth, and he had no idea what kind of help he actually needed. "That's fortunate," she said, "because I'm better at help than I am at being a woman." Something moved behind his eyes, not amusement, not warmth, something more preliminary than either. He picked up her bag without asking and walked toward the house, and she followed him across the yard of the Lund Ranch in Laramie County, Wyoming Territory, into a life she had not been able to imagine clearly enough to fear. The advertisement had found her in Zanesville, Ohio, tucked between notices for dry goods and a missing mule in the back pages of the Gazette. "A working ranch in Wyoming Territory," it said. "Capable woman sought. The work is considerable." She had read it 3 times. At 28 years old, with her husband 2 years in the ground, and her in-laws quietly reclaiming the surveying equipment that had been his, and then hers and now, apparently theirs again, Selah had looked at that small notice and recognized it for what it was, a door. She was not the kind of woman who waited for windows. She had written to the agency. The agency had written to Cormac Lund. Cormac Lund had sent back a letter in handwriting so precise it looked like it had been drafted by a man accustomed to legal documents, which, she would learn he had been. The letter said, "The ranch requires management. I require someone capable of managing it. I do not require conversation or sentiment. If those terms are acceptable to you, I will meet you in Cheyenne on the 14th. She had found the terms not only acceptable but relieving. He had met her in Cheyenne with a wagon and 3 words of acknowledgement, and they had ridden the 60 miles north to the ranch, in a silence so complete she had catalogued the landscape instead of breaking it. The high plains giving way to foothills, the sky enormous and indifferent. The mountains beyond the ranch's northern boundary, standing like something that had been there longer than the concept of ownership. The ranch house was bigger than the advertisement had implied, bigger and emptier. The kitchen was functional but joyless. A table, 2 chairs, a cast-iron stove worn smooth with use. The parlor had a fireplace that hadn't seen a fire in what looked like months, maybe seasons. She noticed a row of surveying tools along the far wall, a brass theodolite on a wooden stand, compasses in their leather cases, a folded canvas field map, pinned flat under a glass weight. They were a woman's instruments. She could tell by the way they were arranged, with the particular care of someone who had organized a workspace she intended to return to. She did not ask about them that first night. She made supper from the provisions she found in the larder. Salt pork, dried beans, cornmeal, the kind of meal that required no compliment and gave none back. She set 2 plates. He sat down, ate without speaking, and when he was finished he said, 6 o'clock, start tomorrow, and went to his room. She sat alone in the kitchen and let herself feel the full strangeness of where she was. Then she finished her supper, washed the plates, and went to bed. The first week was an instruction in how completely a man could coexist with another person without actually acknowledging them. Cormac Lund moved through the ranch with the focused efficiency of someone running down a list in his head, one task behind the next, with no space between them for anything as complicated as human contact. He handed her a written list of duties on the second morning: household management, provisions, account, correspondence. She read it, folded it, and put it in her pocket. She did the list, and then she did more. She found the kitchen garden half dead from neglect and brought it back with 3 days of steady work. She repaired a split rail on the fence by the east pasture, using timber she found stacked behind the barn, and a technique her late husband Oliver had shown her, his rancher's knots, his carpenter's patience, her hands doing the work now without him. The ranch hand, an older man named Mitch who had deep-set eyes and the unflappable calm of someone who had seen everything twice, found her halfway through the job and stood with his hat in his hands. "Ma'am," he said carefully. "Hand me that end," she said. He handed it. Then he helped her finish. When they were done, he sat on the fence rail and looked at her the way she was getting used to being looked at out here, with the expression of a man substantially revising a prior assumption. "How long have you been here?" Mitch asked. 5 days, she said. He nodded slowly. The last 3 didn't make it past the end of the first week. The last 3 women he sent for. 2 women, 1 man. The man lasted 9 days. He tilted his head toward the house. He's not what you'd call welcoming. No, she agreed. He isn't. Did something happen to make him that way, or was he born to it? Mitch was quiet for a long moment. About 3 years back, he said finally, and left it there, the way you leave a door unlocked that you're not sure someone should open. She didn't press. She had learned from Oliver's illness that some information had to be earned, not asked for. The breaking point came on the 8th day, and it came from the surveying instruments. She had been dusting the parlor, methodically, working her way around the room, when she reached the brass theodolite on its stand and paused. It was a good instrument, an expensive one. She lifted the dust cloth around it without touching it, the way you move around something that belongs to someone who is not there to give permission. And in doing so, she noticed, on the shelf below it, a field journal, leather-bound, initials stamped into the cover, E.L. She put her cloth down and stood in the middle of the parlor for a moment. Then she went back to the kitchen, because it was not her place to open someone else's field journal, but the initials stayed with her. E.L., not C.L., not Cormac's, someone else's, someone who had set those instruments up with care, who had intended to return to them, and hadn't. That evening at supper, she said, quietly and directly, the surveying equipment in the parlor, whose was it? Cormac set down his fork. My wife's, he said. The kitchen held the words for a moment. I won't move them, Selah said. I know you won't. He picked up his fork again. Her name was Elspeth. She was a cartographer. She mapped 30 miles of the northern range herself before. He stopped. His jaw tightened the way she had already learned, meant he was pulling something back, before she couldn't anymore. Selah did not say she was sorry. She had been told she was sorry so many times after Oliver died that the words had gone hollow, like a bell that's been rung past its usefulness. She said instead, she had good taste in equipment. That's a quality theodolite. Something shifted in his face, fractional, careful. She saved for it 2 years, he said. They finished supper in silence, but it was a different silence than the ones before it. Less absence, more presence of things that were beginning slowly to be acknowledged. She found the discrepancy in the land records on a Thursday, and it was not what she had been looking for. She had been going through the ranch correspondence at his request, 3 months of letters stacked in a wooden box unanswered, when she found a document from a law firm in Laramie. Formal letterhead, dense paragraphs. She read it once, then again, then set it on the desk very carefully and pressed both hands flat against the wood. The letter was from an attorney representing a duskless Lund of Rawlins, Wyoming. It asserted, in the precise language of men who are paid to make false things sound inevitable, that under the terms of Herschel Lund's original land grant, Cormac's grandfather, the ranch property passed in direct succession to the eldest surviving male heir, in the event that the secondary heir produced no living children within 5 years of inheritance. Cormac had inherited the ranch 4 years ago, when his grandfather died. He had no living children. His wife had died in the same season as the inheritance. The letter informed him that in 14 months the clause would come into effect and the property, all of it, the ranch, the northern grazing rights, the mineral survey acreage, would transfer to Douglas Lund. Selah went to find Mitch. She found him at the horse barn, and she said, "Tell me about Douglas Lund." Mitch straightened slowly. His expression went to a place she recognized, the look of someone deciding how much was responsible to say. Cormac's older brother, he said, 10 years older, was supposed to inherit from old Herschel, but Herschel left it to Cormac instead because Douglas had already run a lumber operation into the ground in Colorado. Douglas never forgave it. He paused. There's silver in the northern hills. Everybody knows it. Herschel knew it. Douglas knows it. And he's been waiting, Selah said. 3 years, Mitch said, since Elspeth passed. She thanked him and went back to the desk and read the letter a third time, looking now not at what it said but at what it cited. The clause referenced a specific paragraph of the original land grant. She found the land grant in the bottom of the correspondence box, yellowed with age, Herschel Lund's signature at the bottom in the looping hand of an old man. She found the paragraph they referenced. It did not say what they said it said. The clause in the original document spoke of succession in the event of no living heirs at the time of the primary heir's death. Not a 5-year window, not a rolling condition. Death, natural succession. Nothing about a deadline, nothing about a 14-month transfer. She sat with that for a long time. Then she heard Cormac come in from the yard and she said, from the desk, "Come here, please. I need to show you something." He came to the doorway. He looked at her face and the careful blankness that came over him was, she was beginning to understand, his version of bracing. "Sit down," she said. "It won't take long. I just need you to stay calm while I explain it." He sat. She walked him through it. The attorney's letter, the claimed clause, the original document, the language that did not match. She did it plainly, without embellishment, because he was a man who had spent years in a courtroom and could read through obfuscation without help. When she finished, he was very still. "You're certain?" he said. "I've read it 4 times. The clause they're citing does not appear in this document." "Then they're citing a version that doesn't exist," he said quietly. "Or a version that was created to exist." "Yes," she said. "That's what it looks like." He stood. He walked to the window and stood there with his back to her and his hands at his sides, and she let him have the silence because she had enough patience left over from 3 years of watching Oliver fight his own losing battle to know the shape of a man processing something that changes the calculation of everything. "Douglas has had copies of that document for 4 years, Cormac said at last. "He requested one from the county clerk the week after grandfather died. I remember because grandfather's solicitor mentioned it. He's had 4 years to alter a copy," she said. "And 14 months until the alleged clause takes effect." He turned. "Why are you showing me this?" She looked at him steadily. "Because it's wrong," she said. "And I don't know how to see something wrong and do nothing about it." He stared at her for a long moment, long enough that she could see him working through something. "You were a surveyor's wife," he said. "How do you know how to read a land grant?" "Oliver taught me," she said. "He said the law and the land were the same kind of thing. Both of them came down to what was actually written versus what someone wanted you to believe was written. He said the most important skill in both fields was reading the original document yourself instead of taking anyone's word for what it said." Something moved in Cormac's face, slow and careful, like a current changing direction far below the visible surface. "Oliver," he said, "your husband." "He died 2 years ago," she said. "Fever in February, it was fast." "I'm sorry," he said, and unlike the times she had heard it before, it landed differently, said by a man who knew the exact specific weight of that particular loss. "I know you are," she said. It was the most personal thing she had said to him in 8 days. He crossed to the desk and picked up the original document and read the relevant paragraph himself, the way she had known he would. Not because he doubted her, but because he was a man who verified. His face when he set it down was the face of someone who has been confirmed in something they were hoping was wrong. "I need to write to a land attorney in Laramie," he said. "I've already drafted the letter," she said, and passed it across. He read it. His mouth did something at one corner. Not quite a smile, but adjacent. He folded the letter and put it in his breast pocket. "I'll ride to town tomorrow," he said. "Take the original document with you," she said, "and have it witnessed at the post office before you mail the letter. Date the witness signature." He looked at her. "Oliver's business partner tried something similar when Oliver died," she said simply. "I learned from it." He held her gaze for a moment, and in that moment, something happened that she filed away carefully. He saw her. Not the woman who had appeared in his yard with a traveling bag, not the help he had sent for, not a presence to be tolerated. He saw her, specifically, and whatever he saw made him say quietly, "All right, what else?" That was the second time he had asked her for something. It was nothing like the first. Douglas Lund came to the ranch on a Tuesday morning, unannounced, in a good coat, and the expression of a man who has been comfortable his whole life and sees no reason to stop. He was broader than Cormac, heavier, with the same jaw made into something less careful. He looked at Selah the way he might look at a new piece of furniture, assessing its usefulness, already bored. "This is the woman you sent for," he said to Cormac, not a question. "This is my wife," Cormac said, with the same flat certainty she'd heard in his voice when he stated facts that were not to be disputed. Douglas looked at her with revised attention. "My brother's always been sentimental about the wrong things," he said pleasantly. "Miss." "Mrs. Lund," she said. Something flickered in his face. He sat down without being invited, which told her everything she needed to know about how he moved through rooms he believed belonged to him. "I want to settle this reasonably," he said. "No lawyers, no commissions. No. Cormac, you keep the house and the south pasture. I take the northern acreage, and we're done." "The northern acreage is where the Silver Survey runs," Selah said. "That's a generous offer you're making to yourself." Douglas looked at her, his pleasantness adjusted slightly into something more careful. "The document is filed," he said. "The clause is clear." "The clause you filed isn't in the original grant," she said. "We have the original, your grandfather's notary's personal record, and a signed affidavit from the notary herself. We also have a federal land commissioner reviewing the filed copy for evidence of alteration." She folded her hands on the table. "The document you filed is fraudulent, Mr. Lund. I imagine you know that." The room was very quiet. Douglas looked at his brother. Cormac was watching him with the focused stillness of a former judge who has heard a great many lies in his career and knows exactly what one looks like. "You have no proof of alteration," Douglas said, and the pleasantness was fully gone now. "We will," Selah said. "Document examiners can determine whether different inks or hands were used in a single document. That's standard procedure in a federal fraud investigation." She met his eyes directly. "Is that the conversation you want to be having?" Douglas stood. He buttoned his coat with slow, deliberate motions. He looked at Cormac. "You married a lawyer," he said. "I married capable," Cormac said. Douglas left. The door closed. Mitch, who had positioned himself near the barn with the patient attentiveness of a man who knows when to be nearby without being underfoot, watched the wagon clear the gate and then looked through the window at Selah and gave a single nod that contained considerable approval. She sat at the kitchen table and breathed in and out until her hands stopped trembling. It took less time than it had with Caldwell, with Douglas. Less time than it had the first time she'd done something frightening. That felt like progress. That evening, Cormac came in from the barn later than usual and sat down at the table, not to eat, just to sit, which was new. She was writing a letter to Arthur Van at the Federal Land Commission, and she kept writing, giving him the space to be quiet in, which was, she had found, often what he needed most. "Oliver," he said finally, "how long was he sick?" She set down her pen. 8 months from the first fever to the end, she said. He knew by the 4th month what it was going to be. "He spent those last months teaching me everything he thought I'd need." She paused. "He was better at dying than most people are at living. He just decided what mattered and did that until he couldn't." Cormac's hands were on the table, very still. "Elspeth went in 12 hours, he said. "The baby, too. I was in Rawlins for a court session. I came home and she was all ready." He stopped. "I was a judge. I had spent 14 years believing the law was the most reliable thing there was, that if you did everything correctly, the outcome was just." His voice was level, and it was costing him to keep it that way. 12 hours. She did not look away from it. She let it be as large as it actually was. "There's no correct that keeps that from happening," she said quietly. "You know that." "I know it now," he said. "I didn't know what to do with knowing it." "So you stopped deciding things mattered," she said. "The law, the ranch, everything." "It was easier," he said. She thought about the brass theodolite on its stand, untouched for 3 years. The field journal with the initials EL. The kitchen garden gone to weeds. The fence that had needed fixing for so long it had become invisible. "It didn't work," she said, not unkindly. "No," he said, "it didn't." They stayed in the kitchen for a long time after that, not speaking, just occupying the same space with all the accumulated weight of two people who have each lost the person they expected to spend their life with, and have each, in their own way, kept walking anyway. Outside, the Wyoming wind moved across the foothills in the dark, indifferent and constant. When she stood to put out the lamp, she said, "Elspeth, that's a good name." He looked up. She would have found all of this. He gestured, a slow movement that took in the whole situation, the letters, Douglas, the Federal Commission, Selah at the desk with her borrowed surveying knowledge and her dead husband's careful lessons. She would have found it interesting. That's what she always said about hard things, that they were interesting. "She sounds like someone worth knowing," Selah said. "Yes," he said simply, "she was." The federal examiner's findings came back 19 days later. The analysis was definitive. The succession clause had been added to the filed document after the original composition, in a different hand, with different materials, It had simply relied on no one looking closely enough to see. The ruling, when it arrived in full, was unambiguous. The filed copy was declared fraudulent. The original grant was the binding document. Douglas Lund was referred for criminal prosecution under federal statute. The Lund Ranch, all 1,100 acres of it, including the Northern Mineral Survey acreage where the silver ran through the hills like a promise kept, was confirmed in full and uncontested ownership to Cormac Lund. He read it at the kitchen table on a gray November morning, and Selah sat across from him and watched his face move through several things she recognized. The relief, the exhaustion of having braced for so long, and underneath both of those, something harder to name. Something like the feeling of a room opening that has been closed from the inside for a very long time. "It's done," she said. "It's done," he said. He set the ruling down and looked at her, and the look had something in it she had been watching develop for months. The way you watch a plant pushing through soil, slowly, stubbornly, against the weight of everything that had been piled on top of it. "I sent for help," he said. "That's what the advertisement said. I told myself that's what I needed." "I know," she said. "I was wrong about what kind of help." She looked at him across the table, waiting. "Stay," he said, "not because the deed needs a wife, not because of any clause or legal arrangement." He said it the way he said everything that mattered to him, plainly, without decoration, trusting that the plain truth was sufficient. "Stay because I would like you to stay, because this ranch is better with you in it, because I am." He paused, and in that pause, she could feel the cost of what he was allowing himself. "Because I am better when I am not trying to be alone." The kitchen was very still. The brass theodolite stood in the parlor on its stand. The field journal with the initials EL sat on the shelf below it. The kitchen garden was banked for winter and would come back in the spring, as it would every spring after this one. "I already decided that," she said, "the day I fixed the east fence." He looked at her. That was the third day. "I know," she said. Something happened in his face then, the real laugh of a man who had not laughed fully in 3 years, unguarded and brief and completely genuine, and she felt it land in her chest like the first warm day after a long winter. Unexpected, unearned, and entirely welcome. He reached across the table and covered her hand with his, the way you hold something you have been afraid to need and have decided, carefully and against considerable prior evidence, to need anyway. Outside, Mitch crossed the yard toward the horse barn with the unhurried pace of a man who knows everything is exactly where it should be. The Wyoming sky went on above the ranch and the foothills and the silver in the northern hills that would be there long after all of them, enormous, indifferent, and, if you were inclined to look at it that way, magnificent. Selah Briard had always been inclined to look at it that way. She always would be.